And we are back with the team history videos. We've only got 2 left. And they're performing well. Not tremendously well, but performing well. Keep in mind during the summer, sometimes I'll post videos that I know the view counts aren't going to be really, really high on, but I know that over the regular season, when people are like, "Man, I'm tired of just these previews and reviews," I can say, yeah, there's a whole bunch of content I did over the summer. And there are also a lot of people who don't watch the hockey videos during the summer because for whatever reason they're not thinking about hockey. Who knew? But the Washington Capitals were up 2, which means I've only got Washington and Winnipeg left. And Washington's an interesting one in that I did the first team history videos in 2017. These guys won the Cup in 2018. Of course, St. Louis won it in 2019. Those two were a big part of the reason why I decided I needed to redo these videos. They've made the playoffs 29 out of 44 seasons. Not a tremendously great record, but part of that is because from 75 to 82, they just didn't make it. So that's a lot of years of not making the playoffs, and it started with an 8-win season at the beginning of it, and it didn't get better quickly. Like, it was just very gradual steps forward until David Poile stepped in as general manager. They made the finals in 98, and of course they won the Stanley Cup, as I said, in 2018, and that changes the way we view their entire history, which is good because Pittsburgh and Washington traditionally has been a bad matchup for Washington. Their all-time leader in points is Alex Ovechkin, so no surprise there. 658 goals, 553 assists, 1,211 points. Nicholas Backstrom, 231 goals, 642 assists, 873 points. Peter Bondra, 472 goals, 353 assists, 825 points. Bondra was pretty dominant for a short period there, and it's a shame he didn't get to 500 goals. It is. And especially as a Capital, he should have had his whole career in Washington as well. Never should have been traded. And I only say that not because I think they made a bad mistake trading him. It's just some players you think they should have spent their entire career in one city, and Bonder's one of those guys. Gartner, 397 goals, 392 assists, and 789 points. Some statisticians would be triggered by this. Just short of 400 goals, just short of 400 assists, which leaves him just shy of 800 points with the Capitals. Michael Pavanka, 181 goals, 418 assists, 599 points. Pavanka was what Backstrom is to the team now during his run there. Very, very good setup, man. Dale Hunter, 181 goals, 375 assists, 556 points, and of course, infamously remembered for the hit on Pierre Turgeon during the 93 playoffs. But Hunter was a pretty darn good player in his own right. Just had a temper. Bent Gustafson, 195 goals, 359 assists, 554 points. Mike Ridley, 218 goals, 329 assists, 547 points. Calle Johansson, 113 goals, 361 assists, 474 points. And Dennis Baruch, 182 goals, 249 assists, 431 points. And the subject of a book that is out and around, and it's one of the hockey books I don't have yet. Wins leaders. Olaf Kolzig is still there with 301. Now, if Braden Holtby decides to stay with the Caps, if they decide to stay with him beyond this coming season, Holtby will annihilate that record. He's currently sitting with 257 wins. And if you look at goaltenders currently in the NHL and you ask yourself now, which goalie is most likely to end up being top 3 in wins when they retire, Holtby is on a huge, just a torrid pace when it comes to wins. So don't rule out him ending up with 500-plus wins in his career. Don Beaupre, 128. Al Jensen, 94. And tied for 5th are Jim Carey, the net detective, and Pete Peters. Jim Carey, of course, was this phenomenon, and then it just stopped. Coaching wins, Brian Murray, 343. Barry Trotz, 205, including that Stanley Cup win, puts him ahead of Brian Murray in many people's hearts. But Brian Murray was the coach of the team during the 80s when they had trouble getting over the hump. Bruce Boudreau, 201. Ron Wilson, 192. And Terry Murray with 163 for the Washington Capitals. So both of the Murray brothers are on the board. And if you didn't know which Murray was on TV talking, sometimes you could mix the two of them up. Could be pretty easy sometimes. So again, playoff success wasn't really there until 2018. This was a team that was known as the one that just couldn't get over the top, except in 98. And there were some who viewed that run as a fluke. So, yeah. The Capitals, thank God they finally won a cup so we could stop talking about that part of their history. Captains. Doug Moens was the captain during that miserable first season, 74-75. Bill Clement, 75-76. Yvonne Labor, 76 through 78. Guy Chiron, 78-79. Ryan Walters, 79-82. Rod Langway from 82 to 93. Kevin Hatcher, 93-94. Dale Hunter, 94 through 99. Now, I've got to fix one small thing. And then Adam Oates, 98 to 2002. Brendan Witt also had a captaincy, 2001, 2002. And Steve Konowalchuk also wore the C that year. He went from 2001 to 2004. So he retained it for 02, 03, and 03, 04. 2005, 2006, that was Jeff Halpern. Chris Clark, 2006 to 2010. And of course, from 2009 until now, it's been the Alex Ovechkin show as captain. So 10 years as captain. He is going to end up catching Rod Langway, who was captain from 82 to 93. So pretty solid. And it's interesting, too, in that Ovechkin, the ultimate goal scorer for the Capitals, and Langway, the ultimate in preventing goals for the Capitals during his run with the Washington franchise. Top 10 draft picks. 1974, drafting first, Greg Jolly, which it was a pan move very, very quickly. 1976, drafting first overall again, they get Rick Green. Green was a good defenseman. Worth the number one draft pick? Probably not. 1977, drafting third, they get Robert Picard. Also kind of a pan draft pick. 1978, drafting number 2 overall, they get Ryan Walter. 1979, drafting 4th overall, they get Mike Gartner. So their draft picks are getting better. Darren Veach would be the number 5 draft pick in 1980. 1981, drafting 3rd, Bobby Carpenter. 1982, drafting 5th, Scott Stevens. 1990, drafting 9th, John Slaney. 1994, drafting 10th, Nolan Baumgartner. 1996, drafting 4th, Alexander Volchkov. And you want to talk about prospects who were really, really looked at as this guy's, he's going to be the guy. This is going to happen. Volchkov was seen as being like a star. He was going to be a star in the NHL. It never happened. 1997, drafting 9th, Nick Boynton. 1999, drafting 7th, Chris Beach. 2004, drafting 1st, Alex Ovechkin. So 8 years after Volchkov, they're like, yep, last time we drafted a Russian early, it didn't work out, but this Ovechkin guy is going to, and he did. 2006, drafting 4th, they get Nicholas Backstrom, and 2007, drafting 5th, Carl Alsner, who, of course, is still Montreal property, likely to play in the American Hockey League this year, though. But that's it for their top 10 picks. So really, from 74 all the way through 82, yeah, they're right there, but it got better for them after that. And it really became a team that was known for its regular season success and postseason flops. Trade history. So we're getting into the trades here. And I've got, I think, 43 trades on the board, something ridiculous. So that means there's going to be a lot of people. You forgot these ones. Took me hours to do this. So, yes, there are trades that I leave off these boards, but these boards take me hours to set up. June 3rd, 1975, Washington acquires Bill Clement, Don McLean, and a 1975 first. Philadelphia gets the number 1 overall draft pick in return, which became Mel Bridgman. So Bridgman, good, tough player. Washington came out of this one, okay. Bill Clement ended up being their captain, so that's something, right? November 30th, 1976, they trade Greg Jolly to Detroit in exchange for Brian Watson. So very quickly they realized, okay, so Jolly's not going to work out, and they traded him. June 11th, 1980, Washington acquires the goaltender Mike Palmateer and a 1980 third-round pick. Toronto gets Tim Coulis, Robert Picard, and a 1980 second-round pick, which became Bob McGill. So, Picard's not working out. They trade him. Greg Jolly didn't work out. They trade him. Capitals, not afraid to move guys, going, this just isn't working for us. June 10th, 1981, Washington acquires a 1981 first-round pick, which became Bobby Carpenter. Colorado gets a first-round pick, which they used to draft Joe Cirella, and got a second-round pick as well. So Washington did okay. Carpenter would end up scoring 50 goals in one season for them, so that's not bad. And, of course, Cirella went on to have a pretty good career as a mostly known as a defensive defenseman. around the league. June 9th, 1982, Washington acquires Ken Houston and Pat Riggin. Calgary gets Howard Walker, George White, a 1982 sixth, a 1983 third, which became Perry Berzan, and a 1984 second, which became Paul Ranheim. So when you look at it, Riggin became a decent goaltender for the Caps until Pat Riggin was kind of Pat Riggin, and he Riggined himself right out of Washington. But Ranheim was a decent enough player for Calgary, and so I think the Flames are pretty happy with that return eventually. September 9th, 1982, Washington gets cash for Toronto taking back Palmateer. Mike Palmateer was supposed to be a goaltender that would help get them to the playoffs, and it just didn't work. Palmateer was mostly a disaster for the Caps, and ends up going back to Toronto just for cash. September 9th, 1982 as well, the trade. This was known as the trade. Brian Engblom, Doug Jarvis, Rod Langway, and Craig Laughlin are acquired by the Washington Capitals in exchange for Rick Green and Ryan Walter going to Montreal. So, they have traded their first 4 top 10 draft picks already, and it's 1982. And of course, Walter and Green would win a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens in 86. So while we talk about how lopsided this trade is, and really in all honesty, Doug Jarvis, who was the Iron Man in the NHL, Langway, one of the best defensive defensemen in NHL history, it is hard to argue that the Capitals didn't do really, really well with this, but Walter had some good seasons for Montreal, and so did Rick Green. Again, Rick Green likely shouldn't have been a number 1 overall draft pick, or, by today's standards, he'd be considered a disaster. But in general, good defensive defenseman, just that number 1 draft choice, yeah. Anyhow, moving along, July 5th, 1983, Washington acquires a 1984 second, which became Stephen Leach. Minnesota gets Dennis Muruk. Once Muruk's goal scoring started to kind of wane a little bit, Washington moves on, and he goes to Minnesota. October 18th, 1983, Washington acquires Larry Murphy. LA gets Brian Engblom and Ken Houston. This is a huge win for the Capitals, who likely called up the Kings and said, hey, can we get Murphy? And they said, yeah, okay, what do you want for him? We want Engblom and Houston. And at that point, the Caps are done. So I believe it was still David Poile in charge at that point. November 14th, 1985, Washington acquires Pete Peters. Boston gets Pat Riggin. This is a win for the Capitals. January 1st, 1987, Washington gets Bob Crawford, Kelly Miller, and Mike Ridley. The New York Rangers get Bobby Carpenter in a 1989 second. This is during Trader Phil days for the New York Rangers. So they come out of it with Kelly Miller, who had a really solid career with the Capitals, and Mike Ridley, who's of course on the board here. Pretty solid, and Bobby Carpenter was not going to get back to 50 goal form. So pretty decent deal for the Washington Capitals there. June 13th, 1987. Dale Hunter and Clint Malarchuk are acquired by the Washington Capitals. Quebec takes Gaetan Duchesne, Alan Hayworth, and a 1987 first-round pick. That became Joe Sakic. So we can look back at this and go, wow, they got Dale Hunter, who became a top 10 player, and Clint Malarchuk, who's not on the board, but pretty decent goaltender. And all they gave up was a draft pick that became Joe Sakic. So while you can look at Hayworth and Duchesne and say, well, that wasn't a huge loss for Washington, Sakic probably would look pretty good in a Capitals jersey. July 22nd, 1988, Washington acquires the rights to Jeff Courtnall from Edmonton for Greg C. Adams. There was an offer sheet put in for Jeff Courtnall, which Edmonton wouldn't match. So they just traded him to Washington. Washington matches the offer, and that's why they got him for Greg C. Adams. March 6, 1989, Washington gets Calle Johansson in a 1989 second, which became Byron Dafoe. Buffalo gets Grant Ledyard, Clint Malarchuk, and a 1991 sixth, which became Brian Holzinger. So, Malarchuk spends a couple of years as a Capital. He gets moved along to Buffalo. Johansson, of course, is in the top 10 and was a very good defenseman for them for a long time. March 7th, 1989, Washington acquires Dino Ciccarelli and Bob Rouse. Minnesota gets Mike Gartner and Larry Murphy. This is a trade likely Washington would want to have a do-over on. Gartner and Murphy, really solid players. Gartner didn't have a very long run in Minnesota before he got moved on to the Rangers. Murphy, excellent defenseman. He would end up moving on to the Penguins and winning Stanley Cups. Dino and Bob Rouse as a return. Yeah, that's a trade that I think Minnesota wins that one. March 5th, 1990, Washington gets Mike Liut. Hartford gets Ivan Korivo. So, decent enough trade. And you'll notice a lot of goaltenders have played in Washington over the years. They have had their share of goaltenders. And some very solid young goaltenders as well. July 13th, 1990, Washington gets Mike Lawler and Peter Zezel. St. Louis gets Jeff Courtnall. So Courtnall did not last very long in Washington. He moves on to St. Louis and then would move on to Vancouver. Courtnall bounced around a little bit at that point. But this was an okay return. Zezel was a decent enough center. January 16th, 1991, Washington gets L.I. Frady. Toronto gets Bob Rouse and Peter Zezel. So Zezel didn't stay very long with the Capitals. Rouse gets moved on from, and L.I. Frady, the wild thing, goes to Washington. Frady, honestly, I think would be more highly regarded looking back, and people would have greater memories of him if not for injuries. Injuries really kind of took him out. L.I. Frady was one of the most fun players in the league and one of the most entertaining to watch. June 20th, 1992, Washington acquires Kevin Miller, Kelly's brother. Detroit gets Dino Ciccarelli. So the Wings get Dino Ciccarelli for what you think would be a bit of a steal, but I liked Kevin Miller. I did. I liked Kevin Miller. I thought he was a good player. March 21st, 1994, Washington gets Joe Juneau. Boston gets L.I. Frady. So Joe Juneau, who had been this kind of a flash in the pan for Boston, to be honest. He had a couple of really good years and then sort of fell off. Ends up going to Washington. January 18th, 1985, Washington gets Rick Mrozek and Mark Tenorti, and the Dallas Stars take Kevin Hatcher. Trade that I didn't really like at the time as a Dallas Stars fan because I love Tenorti. July 8th, 1995, Washington gets the 1996 first-round pick that became Volchkov. And a fourth, LA takes Byron Dafoe and Dmitry Kristich. So I'm going to go ahead and give that one to LA. Although, again, Washington, no shortage of goaltenders, so they can give up Dafoe because there's always other goaltenders coming up for Washington. April 3rd, 1996, Washington gets Anson Carter. Colorado gets a 1996 fourth-round pick. March 1st, 1997, Washington gets Adam Oates, Bill Ranford, and Rick Tocchet. Boston takes Jason Allison, Jim Carey, Anson Carter, a 1997 third and a 1998 second. Good trade for Washington. Adam Oates had kind of said some things about the management system in Boston, so Boston moves him out. They should have moved out the management in Boston, not him. But yeah, I remember Boston taking back Jim Carey, and I remember thinking, wait, why? Why? So Ranford went and Carey came in, and that didn't make any sense to me at the time. Jason Allison had a decent enough run for Boston. Just as there's another career that was shortened by injuries as well. March 8th, 1998, Washington gets Esa Tikkanen. Tikkanen, of course, would play a role in them getting to that 1998 finals. Florida gets Dwayne Hay and a 1999 103rd overall draft pick. March 13th, 2001, Washington gets Trevor Linden, Danis Zubris, and a 2001 second-round pick. Montreal takes Jan Bulis, Richard Zednik, and a 2001 first. Trevor Linden bounced around the league a bit when he wasn't a Canuck. And so this was him going to Washington, and Washington trying to get that last bit. We can do this. We can win. We can just get the right mix. And they figured they'd found the cure July 11th, 2001, when they acquired Jaromir Jagr and František Kuchera in exchange for Chris Beach, Ross Lupischuk, and Michael Civic going to Pittsburgh. And if you're like, who, what, and what? Yeah. That's what we all did. And Jagr went to Washington, had a really good first couple of years, and then, yeah. His exit from Washington wasn't glorious. And actually his value had gone down by the time he was traded out of Washington. And then he had a resurgence after leaving Washington as well. November 10th, 2001, Washington gets a 2002 first and a 2003 third. Vancouver takes Trevor Linden off their hands and a 2002 second round pick. So they get a first back in exchange for trading out Trevor Linden. Vancouver, happy to have their captain back. July 12th, 2002, Washington gets a 2002 first. This is June 12th. Can't be July 12th. June 12th. 2002 first, Alexander Semin. Dallas gets a 2002 first, second, and sixth. So, Semin becomes the first rounder and honestly should be in the top 10, but he was a really hot and cold kind of player. January 23rd, 2004, Washington gets Anson Carter again, for this time for Jaromir Jagr. So, Anson Carter returns, and it's Jagr that they trade out. So, Jagr for Carter. And if you look and you go, that doesn't seem like it's a fair trade. Jagr's value had gone down at that stage, and he goes to the Rangers and rediscovers his scoring touch there. February 18th, 2004, Washington gets Brooks Laich and a 2005 second. Ottawa takes Peter Bondra. Laich, of course, would play for a while with the Capitals, and he had a decent enough career, but it's a shame Bondra didn't spend his entire career as a member of the Capitals. July 30th, 2005, Washington gets a sixth-round pick in the 2006 draft, which became Matthew Perreault. Buffalo takes Tim Kennedy. March 9th, 2006, Washington takes Chris Beach. Yes, Chris Beach comes back to Washington. And a 2006 first, which became Semyon Varlamov. Nashville takes Brendan Witt. Nashville looking for some beef on the blue line and get themselves over the top kind of thing. And that first-round pick becoming Varlamov. Pretty decent pick for the Washington Capitals. June 20th, 2008, Washington gets a 2008 first-round pick, which became John Carlson. Philadelphia gets Steve Eminger and a 2008 third. Huge win for Capitals there. June 26, 2010, Washington gets a 2010 fourth, which became Philip Grubauer. Toronto takes a 2010 fourth and fifth. So Grubauer, nice steal there in the fourth round for the Capitals. I did mention these guys have had a lot of goalies come through town, and there's a lot of goalies mentioned on this board for a reason. July 1st, 2011, Washington gets a 2012 first, which became Philip Forsberg, and a second, and Colorado gets Semyon Varlamov. And I remember at the time thinking, that's a steep price Colorado's paying for Varlamov that we don't even know necessarily is going to be a great starter. But of course, Forsberg, April 3rd, 2013, he's traded to Nashville in exchange for Michael Latta and Martin Erat. So, the Capitals doing what they did over their history until 2011, turning a win into a loss. April 3rd, 2013 was that trade. Then July 2nd, 2015, Washington gets TJ Oshie. St. Louis takes Troy Brouwer, Phoenix Copley, and a 2016 third. So, pretty good deal there for Washington. February 27th, 2017, Washington takes Kevin Shattenkirk, and they take Phoenix Copley back. St. Louis takes Zach Sanford, Brad Malone, and a 2017 first, which St. Louis traded and became Morgan Frost for the Flyers. Sanford played a bit part for St. Louis in that Stanley Cup run, but he did play a small role in that Stanley Cup run this year. February 19th, 2018, Washington gets Michael Kempny from Chicago for a 2018 third and a pick, or in a move that nobody paid much attention to at the time. Kempny definitely played his part in getting the Capitals to a Stanley Cup in 2018. That was kind of a steal. June 22nd, 2018, Washington takes Philip Grubauer, Colorado takes Philip Grubauer and Brooks Orpik. The reason that Washington's up there, I know why Washington's up there instead of Colorado. Because this was a controversial move at the time. So Philip Grubauer and Brooks Orpik are picked up by Colorado in exchange for a second-round pick in 2018. Colorado then bought out Brooks Orpik, and then Washington re-signed Brooks Orpik at a lower cap hit in a way to make sure that their cap stayed under control. Grubauer was seen as somebody who was expendable, as they had Braden Holtby, and they have other young goaltenders coming up. So Grubauer moves on. Copley ended up becoming the backup. Actually played pretty well as the backup this past season for Washington. So overall, both teams ended up pretty happy with this deal, as Grubauer has become de facto the starter for the Colorado Avalanche going into this year. June 28th, 2019, Washington gets Scott Kosmachuk, a 2020 second, and a third. Colorado gets Andrei Burakovsky. So the price for Burakovsky likely lower than what the Washington Capitals would have ideally wanted. However, they get back 2 draft picks in exchange for a guy who may very well go to Colorado and discover his scoring touch. But there you go. The Washington Capitals. And it's a history that we remember their second round playoff exits against Pittsburgh, their struggles against Rangers and Islanders that date back to the 80s. But Ovechkin and that 2018 Stanley Cup have definitely made it a much more successful looking history than it was prior to his arrival and definitely prior to winning that Stanley Cup. So there you go. The history of the Washington Capitals. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video, and hey, got one more video to go, Winnipeg Jets, and then the history videos are done. Thank you guys so much for all your support throughout the summer watching these videos, and if you're just coming back and you haven't watched the other ones, there's a whole playlist available to you. Thanks again. I will talk to you again soon.